Mike, I know that you were a police officer for more than 13 years. You were part of a gang enforcement task force where you investigated many alleged gang crimes. And of course, as a criminal defense lawyer, you've represented hundreds of defendants charged with the gang enhancement. Let me ask you, Mike, what is the legal definition of a gang in California? Because I get calls from people who say, I've been charged with a gang enhancement and, really I was part of a tagging crew. Or, this was just a sort of a crew or a club of people, friends of mine, we weren't really a gang. What is a gang under the law?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And it's actually an involving question, a difficult question to answer, honestly. I used to tell people a gang was easy to define. It was a group of 3 or 4 more people together that hung out together, claimed a common area or territory, and participated in antisocial behavior. I mean, that's sort of the textbook version as it morphed from years ago to now. But I just had a case where a gang expert testified, and shockingly so, much to every lawyer's surprise in this multiple defendant case, that a person is a part of a gang if they are Hispanic, have a tattoo of any indicia of claiming Southern California, that makes them a de facto associate of the Mexican mafia. And that was the first time I ever heard testimony like that. And I have to tell you, no legal definition that I have ever read, ever seen, ever heard any expert testify or testified myself about, ever expanded to include that. So what I tell people is this when it comes to what is a gang, what constitutes a gang under the law. And there's no pun in that. A gang is whatever the district attorney thinks they can prove to a jury and get a conviction on. And I know that kind of roundabout way answers your question, but that's what I tell folks. And what we do is we attack every element that they try to put in. And for example, the testimony we just talked about, we're just filing a motion to strike all that testimony and on a 995 motion after a preliminary hearing. So that really is the long and short of it. You have the textbook definition, and then you have this ever-evolving definition that law enforcement use. And as lawyers, we just deal with it as it comes up.
We get calls all the time from parents who say, look, my son got arrested for robbery, and the DA has alleged a gang enhancement also. What is this? What can you tell people? Can you explain what is this gang enhancement?
Well, from my own personal experience, and the law has definitely evolved from the years ago when I was a gang officer, and I recall as a young officer testifying over a couple hundred occasions as a gang expert. The tools that law enforcement have today to identify gang members, to track gang members or alleged gang members, has greatly expanded to when I was a police officer. What I have found, and what I tell folks about this, is the law as it relates to street gangs and enhancements is draconian in nature. The legislators have reserved particular harsh punishment if they believe and they can prove that you're a gang member. And that's a real critical issue. There's enhancements that add time to any sentence. It's a strike, which is one of the most serious types of felonies in California. It could have long-term effects even above and beyond that case.
So just in terms of the strike, though, under California 3 strikes law, what you're saying is that if there's any felony where the DA adds a gang enhancement and the person's convicted, that automatically converts it into a strike?
That's correct. The gang enhancement itself under 186.22 of the Penal Code is a potential strikeable offense. Now, ironically, it's also a section that is a wobbler, and you could get a misdemeanor out of it also. But it can always be used later on as a predicate for any future crimes and future gang allegations.
Now, the enhancement, is it a crime itself? Is it in addition to a crime? What does it mean to say a sentencing enhancement or a crime enhancement?
It's an allegation that's filed with another crime. Basically, the section reads that someone did something for the benefit or on behalf of a criminal street gang. And what happens is if you're convicted of the underlying offense and the allegation is found true that it was for the benefit or enhancement of a criminal street gang, then they can add time onto your sentence.
Now, let's say that the district attorney alleges a gang enhancement, let's say on a robbery case, and that case goes to trial. does that mean that the DA gets to put before the jury a bunch of evidence that the accused is a gang member and sort of makes him look worse before the jury?
It does, and that's one of the main criticisms I and other lawyers have about the gang enhancement. Oftentimes they'll take an individual on the fringe that may know someone that's in a gang, and they'll try to lump them all together as a gang member. I have a case going on right now up in San Bernardino County Court in the High Desert, where there was a party, someone was stabbed, and now they're trying to link all these kids as gang members, when in fact, they're not. One person there may have been a gang member, but the client that we're representing wasn't, and they have all these gang allegations, so they're getting all this terrible testimony out in that case.
Now, when I was a prosecutor in Los Angeles, I prosecuted a lot of gang allegations, and I did a lot of trials in which there was a gang enhancement. And I know that when we had a trial, when we had the gang enhancement, I was able to bring in a lot of evidence that this accused person is a gang member, that he's done a lot of terrible things in the past, that he's associated with the Crips or the Bloods or the Avenues 13 or one of these terrible gangs, and it really has a tendency to inflame the jury. And even if the evidence is sort of weak, that the accused did the crime that he's accused of, the robbery or possession of a gun or murder, whatever is the underlying crime in the trial, once the jury hears all that gang evidence, it's just so inflammatory. They dislike this person, and a lot of times they have a tendency to want to convict just because a person is a gang member. What can you do as a criminal defense lawyer in a trial like that to try to mitigate the effects of that gang evidence?
Well, you can bring motions, of course, under 352 of the Evidence Code, saying that the relevant or material matter is greatly outweighed by the prejudicial effect. Okay. The problem is most courts are not inclined to grant that motion outright because the DA needs to prove the underlying allegation. So they're going to allow them to put some evidence. The best you can hope for, at least in my personal experience, is to limit the amount of information that the jury gets to listen to about the gang allegations. And also, and obviously what we try to do is, a lot of times this evidence is from the past. It's not relevant, it's not current, it's not topical. And we'll try to bring that out in the cross-examination. What someone might have been 10 years ago doesn't make them the same person today, doesn't make them a gang member today, just because 10 years ago they hung out with gang members.
If someone has a son or a husband who's been charged with a crime and a gang allegation, Mike, how important is it to get an attorney, a criminal defense lawyer, who has a kind of sophisticated experience defending gang-type crimes in particular?
It's really an area of law that, unless you understand it well, unless you have a lot of experience in it, whether it's, like from my standpoint, my practical experience being a certified gang expert when I was a police officer, to handling numerous gang cases now, unless you understand the gang mentality, unless you're experienced at cross-examining gang experts, understanding how they use their information, how they train each other, how they teach each other, unless you're really versed in that area, my personal opinion is you can't properly defend someone of those type of allegations unless you really understand them and understand the underlying source of that information. I'm Mike Scafidi, a retired police officer and now a criminal defense attorney with Schaus Law Group. If you or a loved one are in trouble and need help, call me.